It's no strange occurrence that so many Black people now perceive ourselves as being our own worst enemies and reveres our oppressors in spite of such a brutally horrific history of the contrary. This noted mindset is far too widespread amongst our people to be coincidental. It's by deliberate design that so many Black people now think in ways that are against our own self-interest and that instead benefits the white society. And it has absolutely nothing to do with the Willie Lynch myth. Willie Lynch never existed. Usually people have the right to believe whatever they choose to believe. However, there's a profound exception to this rule when it comes to the oppressed. The oppressed must gain a clear, concise, and accurate understanding of our plight and condition in order to liberate ourselves. Because if our understandings are flawed, then all of our liberating remedies and strategies that stem from those flawed understandings will also be flawed. It's for this reason why those who know the truth must teach. African proverb. Presently, millions of us have been misled to believe that our collective minds have been programmed and is being perpetually manipulated by the Willie Lynch slave syndrome. However, that silly myth presents what would in fact be the least effective method used for controlling millions of generations of people. It's simply not how true brainwashing is achieved. True brainwashing requires a system that's being constantly reapplied and reinforced upon the collective minds of a targeted population. If not, its effectiveness would lessen with each new generation instead of becoming stronger. Likewise, if our minds were programmed by slave syndrome during the enslavement of our ancestors, the brainwashing effects would have logically lessened as each new generation moved further away from the timeline of slavery. But this is not the case at all. We are in fact now more mentally enslaved than we were 60 years ago. During the 1960s, we called ourselves brothers and sisters. We implemented the most successful unified protest in U.S. history. And we unanimously agreed that white oppressive forces were our worst enemies. Today, to the contrary, we're now calling ourselves by the N-words. We're more divided than any previous time in history. And millions of us now insist that it's ourselves that are now our worst enemies. Given the fact that we are clearly now more mentally enslaved by the white society today than we were during the 1960s, proves that our collective condition has nothing to do with a slavery myth. Because if it was connected to slavery, its brainwashing effects would have logically lessened with each newer generations as we move further away from the timeline of slavery. But this is not the case because our condition has nothing to do with a silly slave syndrome myth. Not because millions of our people believe that to be true doesn't make it true. It most often is because our people have all received the same false information, and then their minds became trapped by what's called the herd mentality. The herd mentality is the tendency for people to conform to the beliefs held by many within their group they belong to, even when those beliefs are untrue, and even when those beliefs literally insults their own intelligence. The truth is that our plight and condition has absolutely nothing to do with a silly slave syndrome myth. Whenever the truth has been withheld from the oppressed and the oppressed has been kept ignorant, the oppressed will always believe nonsense. The following discloses the truth of our plight and condition. And don't dispute facts you don't understand for the silly slave syndrome myth you've been misled to believe. for doing so will keep you mentally enslaved by your oppressors. We now live in the era of learning the truth. According to the U.S. Department of Defense Doctrine on Psychological Warfare, it states that the most effective way to subdue and control a large targeted population without actually physically fighting them is by inundating them with fraudulent propaganda that misleads them to believe that their core problem lies within themselves. When people have been manipulated to believe that their core problem is an internalized one, this demoralizes them, divides them, makes them self-doubting, self-loathing, and it shifts their collective aggressions away from their oppressors and redirects it against themselves. It also makes the targeted population more compliant with their oppressors' dominance over their lives. It's in fact so effective that many of the oppressed will even prefer their oppressor's dominance over their lives. Furthermore, it also attacks the core foundation of what bonds a people, and they can then be ruled over forever. It works by heavily demoralizing the targeted population, by tapping into the immense power that shame has upon the human mind to mentally enslave the targeted population. This isn't some feeble-minded conspiracy theory. Whenever those in power wants to brainwash a targeted population to think and behave as they want them to, they always heavily demoralize them. This divides them, makes them self-loathing, and makes them much more easier to control. It's a well-proven psychological warfare tactic used for controlling large targeted populations. This is all possible because people are like computers. All you have to do is keep giving people certain information every so often, and you can persuade a targeted population towards an applied objective through the information you feed into their minds. It doesn't matter if the information presented is untrue. Most people will act upon it because they've all been given the same disinformation. This disclosed tactic is published within the U.S. military psychological warfare doctrine. To be made aware of the fact that the U.S. government has developed a psychological warfare program used for controlling and subduing large targeted population by feeding them disinformation, demoralizing disinformation, and then doubt that it's being used against Black people is extremely naive. Because the oppressors control the information that we receive, this logically allows them to control what we believe. And because they write all of our narratives, they therefore literally owns our interpretation of our collective state. They determined a long time ago that by perpetually negatively distorting and marginalizing everything that we believe about ourselves, they could demoralize us, divide us, make many of us self-loathing, and shift our collective aggressions away from their white society and redirect it against ourselves. And that as long as they keep us within this condition, we can then be ruled over forever. The evidence that this is precisely what's being done to Black people by white propagandists is unsurmountable. It's in fact so obvious that it's only by not critically thinking and opening your eyes that it cannot be seen. For when critically thinking, it becomes clear to see just how cartoonishly unrealistic it actually is that virtually all information that we receive about our group from the white society are consistently Black racially demoralizing. It's a nefarious psychological warfare tactic. The truth of our plight and condition is that the white media's unrelenting negative depiction of Black people that amplifies the negative to the point that it distorts our reality, it's much more than just biased media reporting. It is an insidious Black racially demoralizing divide and rule psychological warfare propaganda campaign. Demoralized divide and rule is the method of maintaining control over a targeted population through constant and unrelenting demoralization in order to create self-hate and division between the targeted population. This was precisely what's being done to us by white oppressors. The white society's monopoly over information that black people receives has always given them their greatest power over black people. Through their monopoly over information that we receive, which allows them to control what we believe, the oppressors have deployed a black racially demoralizing divide and rule psychological warfare campaign system against us. This psychological warfare system is deployed like a massive media marketing campaign that constantly subjects the black population to receiving only the fraudulent worst narratives about ourselves. Within this system, fraudulent black racially demoralizing propaganda is being pumped unrelentingly into the unsuspecting minds of the black population without being challenged or counterbalanced by an equal amount of black positive racially affirming information. This conveys the subliminal message that black people are now our own worst enemies and that we therefore need whites to govern over our lives. Moreover, that black people should admire, respect, and trust only whites. This programming system is extremely effective because when black people are repetitively presented these noted narratives from trusted white media sources, it can be very difficult to resist its implied subliminal propaganda programming, especially when the propaganda is being told daily and so unrelentingly. Its weapon is the demoralizing message that it carries and the way that it adversely affects the black population in terms of our beliefs and behaviors. With time being unable to refute the constant negative disinformation that's being told about ourselves, many black people eventually comes to accept them and internalize them. The constant taunting of negative propaganda about us unconsciously influence how many within the black population perceives ourselves, creating profound division and self-hatred among ourselves. It also shifts the collective aggressions of the black masses away from the white society and redirects it against ourselves. No group can be constantly subjected to receiving only the fraudulent and worst narratives about themselves and not suffer some adverse effect. It's not possible. The basis of this concept of warfare works by affecting the subconscious minds of the black population through demoralizing propaganda. It works by tapping into the immense power that shame has upon the human mind to mentally enslave millions of black people. Those black people who do not critically think never notices their mental change. This psychological warfare system provides the white oppressors with a more proficient method used for controlling and subjugating and subduing the black population. For unlike the past blatant racist systems that black people could easily identify and therefore develop counter strategies against, this system today is not easily recognized, nor is it easily comprehended by most of its black victims. This psychological warfare program works so well, in fact, that it not only makes black people more compliant with white dominance over our lives, it in fact, in many cases, causes many black people to prefer white dominance over our lives. It is at the root of the profound feelings of self-hatred and self-contempt now afflicting so many within our black communities. It's also why so many black people walk around constantly making negative generalizations about our own racial groups, while speaking favorably of our oppressors. The oppressed will always believe the fraudulent worst about themselves. It's a quote from Franz Fanon. This isn't some feeble-minded conspiracy theory. It's the truth that they hide from us. Through the skillful, sustained use of repetitive media, subliminal programming, propaganda campaigns, white oppressive forces have created a prison for the collective minds of the black population. This is all possible because people are like computers. All you have to do is keep giving them certain information every so often, and you can persuade an entire generation towards an applied objective. It doesn't matter if the information is true. It is untrue. All that matters is black people believe that is true. We therefore act upon it. This is the truth of our plight and condition. Our plight has nothing to do with a silly slave syndrome myth. Willie Lynch never existed. You have to function based on what is true in order to develop the proper kind of strategies that are necessary to liberate yourself. One love and peace.